Carly Peterson would have been the bride.
I remember, yeah.
I took her name. She's now Miller. But.
I'm going to call our meeting to order. And who would like to call the roll this evening?
I will be doing that honor. Commissioner O'Gorman-Jenkins.
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill. Here. Commissioner Willers.
Here.
Commissioner Barbose.
Here.
Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Nugent.
Here.
And Youth Member Miller. And for the record, note that Commissioners DAMBACH and WIRICK are absent.
All right, thank you. And of course, we also, I assume, are hooked up on Zoom. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is approve the agenda. I'd like to bring to the Commission's attention that we are going to not have agenda item 5.2 at tonight's meeting. That's been pulled, and we will schedule it for a future meeting, probably as a study session and with a wider scope, a broader scope of discussion. And so we only have one item specifically to go over at tonight's meeting. With that, may I get a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
You get to do the roll call again.
Going to get a lot of practice tonight. Commissioner O'Gorman-Jenkins.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent.
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Willers.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose.
Yes.
And Chair Barnett.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. And next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Sir, in the audience,
Yes.
you're such a fine-looking young man. I'd like to invite you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any late or other correspondence we need to review at this time?
No correspondence.
Okay. This portion of the meeting is now when we take comments from the public. And unless you have any comments, we can move through this quite quickly. How about online? Do we have anyone online?
Nobody on Zoom.
Okay. Then we will move on to the next item, which is the consent calendar, in which we have nothing. So we're already into the meat of the agenda. It's only 4 minutes after 6. What we're going to do now is have a public hearing discussing the introduction of an ordinance amending the Sonoma Municipal Code dealing with parking and loading to hopefully simplify and clarify the parking and loading requirements. And we'll now turn it over to our associate, or what is your exact title nowadays?
I am now AICP certified, so you can call me certified planner, no, associate planner.
Our associate planner, Ms. Tierney, thank you.
And bear with me for just a moment. I need to copy the code over to the other computer.
That's fine. While you're doing that, I just want to say we want to welcome our city manager, David Guin, to our meeting tonight, who is, some of you, all of you know, has considerable planning and experience in his background, and I am invited to chime in whenever he feels it would be helpful. Not when it's not helpful, but when it's helpful.
All right, so ordinances are always an interesting item to present, so I will do my best. But the item for discussion is God, I hate this computer, sorry. Is some minor modifications of our existing parking and loading standards. The modifications are to amend Sonoma Municipal Code sections 1948-030 through 1948-060 and 1948-110 through 120. All the commissioners should have a revised ordinance that reflects some edits and suggestions from the city attorney's office, and so this will be the item we'll be discussing this evening. And know, is it worth it? Can you guys see this on the screen, or is it easier to just go off the hard copy? I know we might be we had some issues on Tuesday with the resolution.
It's readable. It's small, but it's readable.
I can make it bigger. Might be easier to just go on the hard copies. But just to, for those who were not present at the last Planning Commission meeting, we had a study session about some larger, broader scope changes to our parking code. And what's the ordinance that's before the Planning Commission this evening is a focused amendment on the issues that there was general agreement on. In general, we're trying to streamline and have more consistency with our parking standards so that as businesses kind of come and go, the parking standards don't change as much. And so the retail going to a restaurant or back wouldn't cause major planning issues. And just going down the list, the first change is for 1948-030. This will expand the distance that's allowed for off-site parking. So typically we require on-site parking, but in the event that off-site is approved, previously the requirement was for it to be within 300 feet of the use, and as proposed would be extended to 600 feet. Are there any comments on that change? Or how do you guess I'll just go through it and then we'll open up. Not a study session. The next change we have is getting into our parking table. So this is table 4.4. So for general manufacturing, we're moving from 1 space per 500 square feet plus some additional square footage based on the size of the building to simplify to have it be 1 space per 1,000 square feet. Next, changing research, development laboratories, and warehouse storage. Research development laboratories would be increasing from 1 space per 600 square feet to 1 space per 1,000 square feet. And the warehouses and storage facilities from 1 space per 1,000 to 1 space per 2,500. And just mentioning for the benefit of everyone, these code amendments were developed in conjunction with W-Trans, our traffic consultant. And based on the study session, we've made some tweaks kind of here or there to the different requirements.
And let me just jump in here for a second, Christina. If the commission will recall, one of the subjects we began to explore at our recent meetings on this topic was looking at a general examination of the parking requirements in the downtown plaza area, specifically looking at what the implications might be of disconnecting the parking requirements from the land use specifically. And we used a discussion of restaurants, for example, as an example of that. That's not addressed in tonight's material. And my hope is that tonight what we will do is finalize these changes, obviously with discussion and additional recommendations if that's the case. But then the result of it would be tonight to essentially approve this and forward it on to the City Council for adoption with the proviso that in the future, as we begin to explore in more depth this question of special parking or eliminating parking requirements in some way or other around the plaza, however we determine to define that area, can be done later, and that this can be modified. So we're not going to be addressing that tonight. The idea is to get something in place so that the projects that are in the pipeline that will be subject to these provisions can have the clarity and certainty of new regulations going forward. So just wanted to throw that in. Thank you, Christina. Go ahead.
Thank you. So moving on, large family daycare, adding a clarification that the requirement is for 1 space per each employee at peak hour. Churches, other places of worship, mortuaries, meeting halls, and performance theaters would be increased from 1 space for each 4 seats or 1 space for each 75 square feet per gross floor area, whichever is greater, will be simplified to 1 space per each 300 square feet. Indoor arcades would also be standardized to 1 per 300 square feet. And modifications to schools, and these are private schools, would be 1 space for each employee present at peak hour. The high school standard would be 1 space per each 4 students. And same standard for trade and business schools. Dance studios and art studios would be standardized to 300 square feet. Now we get into our residential uses. Group quarters would be simplified to 1.5 space per each bed. 1/2. Thank you. That doesn't make sense. Duplexes, 1 space per each unit. Mobile homes, 1 space per each unit. Multifamily would be 1 space for each studio and 1 bedroom unit. 1.5 spaces for units with 2 bedrooms or more, and no requirement for covered parking. It doesn't say that it's prohibited, but it's not a requirement. Live work would be changed to 1 and 1/2 spaces per unit. No additional parking for accessory dwelling units, and this is paralleling the code change from a few months ago for ADUs. Senior housing projects would be 1 space per each 2 units. Senior congregate facilities, 1/3 of a space per each residential unit, plus the guest parking and employee parking. Now going into retail trade. Appliance, building materials, furniture would change from 1 space per 600, plus the ancillary requirements to simplify to 1 per 1,000. Automobile construction equipment would be simplified from 1 space per 600 to 1 per 500, and eliminating the extra calculation. Convenience stores would be standardized to that 300 benchmark. Similar for restaurants, 1 space per each 300 square feet of gross floor area instead of 1 space per each 4 seats. I would love to pause for a moment and just draw your attention to the outdoor seating provision. I think this is we had a little bit of discussion on it at the study session. I'm not sure we had consensus, and the city attorney raised some questions about if additional clarity was required. But I think I'll move through the rest of them and maybe we can circle back. Or would the commission like to stop and discuss?
No, let's go through them and then we'll come back.
So retail, sales, and general merchandise would be simplified to be a standard of 1 per 300. There's a new clarification for sidewalk seating that was not previously a use that was identified, and the recommendation is to not require parking for sidewalk seating. The clarification for tasting rooms regarding outdoor seating. Currently, the language states for outdoor seating, no off-site parking shall be required. So adding a clarification and standard for up to 50% of the indoor gross floor area. Banks and financial services would increase from 1 per 300 to 1 per 500. And similar modifications for consumer products, equipment rental, and medical services, clinics, medical dental offices, as well as offices, administrative offices, pet grooming, and personal services. Dry cleaning pickup facilities would be 1 per 750 rather than 1 per 400, plus additional space for storage area. Storage personal facilities is currently 4 spaces for manager's office, and that would change to 1 space per every 100 storage units. Vehicle repair and maintenance / repair garage would change to 1 space per each 500 square feet of gross floor area. And for veterinary clinics, the additional requirement for a boarding area has been eliminated. So moving on, we have some modifications to the existing section that addresses how we allocate credits for public parking spaces to businesses that front the Sonoma Plaza. And so there's a recommended expansion to not just be for structures that front the plaza, but that are in the Plaza Retail Overlay District. So that's a pretty substantial change to what we do now. Moving down, we have a new section to address space-efficient parking. It didn't exist previously. A recommendation from W-Trans to allow a transportation planner to also be able to prepare the independent reports to present justification for modifications to parking standards rather than just being an engineer. There's a similar modification to shared use of parking facilities, changing the distance from 300 feet to 600 feet. We have some pretty substantial modifications to the language in the in lieu parking fee section. There's the existing language. So this goes back to 2003. And the new provisions for parking, for transportation demand management. And in 1948-060, we have amendments to reflect current language for accessible parking for individuals with disabilities. In 1948-110, the bike parking requirements have been updated pretty substantially, and would love to have some feedback on that. The recommendation from W-Trans had been a list that was the same length as Table 4.4 and had bike parking for every single unit. It seemed a little bit excessive, so I've tried to streamline it a little bit, but open to feedback and suggestions. The bike parking requirements now have two criteria for long-term parking and short-term parking. Long-term parking being parking provided for residents and employees who live or work at a site. There's a word missing. In a secure and weather-protected place to park and store bike. Provides. Sorry. Long-term parking may be located in garages or other limited access areas for exclusive use by tenants. And short-term parking is more for shoppers, customers, messengers, and other users who generally park for 2 hours or less. So this is a new table for 6. Kind of taking the same approach for the parking standards, tried to simplify and streamline and find larger use categories. So commercial would be 1 space per each 15,000 square feet and a minimum of 2 spaces for long-term, and 1 space per each 5,000 and a minimum of 2 spaces for short-term. Do you want me to go through each one or just?
I don't think we need to go through each one. I've got a basic underlying question. It looks like, let's just finish up and then we'll come back to it.
Okay. So the parking and loading recommendations have not changed from the study session. That's it, and then we just have a couple, a new definition for individuals with a disability, or individual with a disability.
Thank you. I've got a couple questions. I guess that in terms of short-term bicycle parking, I'm not clear as to where that would be. In other words, parking the bicycle on the sidewalk is not qualified. I'm assuming it has to be on the public right-of-way, the street in some fashion, or some parking facility, or I'm thinking in terms of how does someone know where to locate bicycle parking? And there doesn't seem to be in here that I saw any specifics as to what the size, dimensions, or other qualities of bicycle parking include, whether it includes some sort of attachment device to lock a bicycle to or lean against, or in other words, I appreciate the idea of encouraging bicycle use, at this point, I don't know if we have what we need in here in order to make it clear to an applicant as to what it is they have to provide.
And if it's the commission's desire, we can take that out for moving it forward to city council. The intention was, so for if you're going to Whole Foods, that there's a number of spaces that are up front and very convenient for patrons who are riding their bikes, getting groceries and leaving quickly. And then there would be a different kind of standard for employees who would be arriving in the morning and parking their bikes for an extended period of time. Or for like a live work, if you have customers coming and going, those would be the easily accessible spaces out front. And maybe for the residents, you would want a covered bike locker that can be locked from the outside.
Well, I understand there's a lot of variables to this bicycle parking option. In other words, I would assume, for example, that a business that has reserved automobile parking specifically for employees and an area for employee parking, that those spaces would be marked employees only. And similarly, they would have an area for bicycle parking, which would say employee parking only as well. Once again, the specifics as to what constitutes the appropriate space, dimension, and characteristics of bicycle parking are absent, so I think we need to flesh that out. And then as to bicycle parking for patrons or the public, once again, we need to define how and where and in what way those spaces will be provided, and all the characteristics of it. And I just think there's more that we need to broaden out in this thing. Why don't we just take these items by items? Commission, if you have any questions or comments about the bicycle portion, now's the chance to do it. Okay, Sheila?
Christina, is there going to be
Yeah, we're going to start with bicycles since that's...
Is there going to be an overall plan about the plaza for bicycle parking? Because that can kind of affect all the businesses around the
Yeah,
around.
we have a number of parking initiatives going on at the same time. This code amendment is one piece. The Planning Commission reviewed the draft parking management plan back in December. Staff is still working on that and refining the draft to address that. We're also working on a downtown bike parking plan as well, and that's going to be going to pros soon. So that kind of the public bike parking in the plaza will be dealt with in that document, and then looking at the downtown comprehensively will be in the parking management plan. And this is kind of looking at our existing code the way it is and trying to simplify and make some focused edits.
Would it make any sense to hold off on the bicycle section until we have the other information first, or is there a reason that we should go ahead and get started on this?
The documents that we have are not going to affect this parking code. Those documents are really telling the city what we're going to do as a jurisdiction, where what these regulations are for a developer and how a developer needs to design their project to accommodate bike parking into the design. But the draft ordinances that we looked at, they're all over the map with bike parking. Some of them are really specific about this is exactly what type of bike rack you need to use, and here's the dimensions, and here's exactly how many. Our code is, tends to leave it up to the Planning Commission, and so there's a lot of different ways that we could go with that, and so it's really helpful to have the feedback that you would like a little bit more specificity.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Mr. Willers?
Well, I think that, I think one of the solutions to the kind of standardization in the code of bicycle parking is to make it a requirement for the applicant to demonstrate that the parking, there are a variety of ways of parking bikes. And so if it's make it the applicant's responsibility to basically to prove to the commission that there's adequate space to park the number of bikes that are required, and to demonstrate that via a bike locker, a type of rack, a type of, because there are a variety of racks that have dimension that are standardized. Parallel parking bikes is a different dimension than lining them up is a different dimension than putting them in a locker. And so, you know, to allow an applicant flexibility to meet these criteria, but at the same time, bring the burden of proof in essence, that they are adequate, I think is a way of making it flexible yet have definition.
Okay, and I would support that with the addition that in our project approval or the application or the specifications as to what the findings have to include, you could say, is that it is the responsibility of the applicants to demonstrate their methodology and way in which they will accommodate, which eliminates us having to specify the kind of rack, square footage, or anything else, which I agree could be unnecessary, as long as they know that it is a requirement to specifically in their floor plans or land use plan demonstrate where and how and in what way the bicycles will be provided for. And I think that would be fine. That saves you the work of having to figure out what's acceptable or what's not, and puts the burden on the applicant. I think that's great. Mr. Barbos.
Well, shouldn't we add some language to this ordinance, just saying an applicant will be charged with the responsibility of demonstrating the ability to provide the parking and how they're going to do it?
Yeah, I think we could-
Precisely.
Yeah, I think we could just add a sentence at the end of applicability. So right now, the first section reads, each land use shall provide at least the minimum number of bicycle parking spaces found to be required by this chapter, except where a greater number of spaces is required through approval of a discretionary permit. The minimum number of bicycle parking spaces to be provided for each use shall comply with table 4.6. And then we can add a bike plan to be reviewed by the planning commission perhaps, and it is in our application submittal checklist, and we're working on making that clearer, and so we could add that in the submittal checklist that it's a requirement to demonstrate the bike parking compliance.
Sounds perfect, thank you. Other comments or questions? Mary, do you ride a bike?
Yes, I do. I ride it every once in a while.
And have you found it difficult or challenging to find some place to park your bike, or?
It depends on the place you're going. Some places like have kind of areas to put them, others don't. But as long as you have a bike lock, you can really put it anywhere, but it does help to have an area to put it.
Okay, thank you. I thought I'd ask someone who actually I know rides a bicycle. Thank you. All right, then let's move on to the next section that has been identified, and I'm working backwards, sorry. This would be on page 10, the in lieu parking fee. Am I correct in understanding that the in lieu parking fee gets paid into the city's general fund? I mean, where do these parking fees end up?
That is an excellent question, and I'm working to get that answer. This language has been on the code since 2003, and so we'll be working behind the scenes to make sure we actually have a fund, and if we need to create it, we can go through that process, but it definitely seems, with all the changes that we're talking about, that it would be more applicable to improve the language rather than delete it altogether. And the recommended edits are from our consultant about how to be more specific about when a fee can be how to establish it and how to determine which projects are eligible to use it.
Okay, let me ask our city manager a question. Can we even forward this on to the city council specifying the payment of an in lieu parking fee when we haven't established the recipient of the fees?
Yes, the fees do go to the general fund. Before this goes to council, we'll identify what that fund is, and our interim finance director right now is working through establishing all the funds for example, tree in lieu fees and others, just to make sure that we have that list. We know the balance and we can report that out, so that is in the works.
Okay,
The
thank you.
current language says that it will be contributed by the developer to a parking improvement trust fund.
Well, there you have a name for it.
We have an
All right. Anything else on the in lieu parking fee? Okay, continuing, Mr. Barbos?
Yeah, I'm a little confused about this, the in lieu parking fee in terms of, it's supposed to be, as I understand it, a way to satisfy parking requirements for off-street parking in connection with an application, which would mean that it's somehow going to make up for the fact that the parking place isn't where the project is. But then you get over to paragraph 4, and it says the fees will be used exclusively for mobility improvements. Well, there's kind of a disconnect there for me. Why are we limiting the use of the fees to mobility improvements when in fact we could have a parking lot somewhere and spend some of this in lieu parking fee to make the parking lot?
So I think at the last item, it does say additional parking spaces. So in lieu, parking fees shall be used exclusively for mobility improvements, including but not limited to bicycle and pedestrian enhancements, improved transit access, or additional parking spaces. And so I think the applicability of this would be, so we have approved a number of parking exceptions previously, and this would be a way to get something for giving a parking exception.
Yeah,
Or
but I'm still
variance.
confused. Why are we limiting use of the money to mobility improvements when it could also be used to create parking, which is what it's supposed to be compensating?
Well, it says additional parking spaces in the list.
The way I'm reading it is it could
Line
be used
3.
for parking spaces.
I'm sorry.
Maybe
I
it's just the
missed-
word mobility that is confusing?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, mobility and parking spaces that doesn't jog my mind either.
Okay, I apologize, I missed that.
Well, you could add the word for mobility and parking improvements, and just add the word parking
About
in there.
multimodal parking improvements,
How about just changing mobility to alternative?
or just deleting mobility.
Or just say improvements
Yeah,
including.
just strike it.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, anything else on this section? No? All right, going back yet to page 8, existing structures in the Plaza Retail Overlay District. I just want to make sure we all understand. Previously, the language in the ordinance pertained to unreinforced masonry structures, of which I think may at this point only have 1 or maybe 2.
And structures adjoining the plaza.
Right, so now we're basically applying this to all of the structures in the overlay district.
Existing structures located in the Plaza Retail Overlay District. As staff, what we run into a lot are businesses on Broadway that don't have parking, and it's existing retail, and it just doesn't have parking on site.
Okay, so my question is, does this replace, supersede, or is it adjunct to the specific number of spaces required in our table, which doesn't specify in plaza or out of plaza unless I'm incorrect?
So the way that we use this is, so if, let's pretend it's a business on Broadway and it's 1,200 square feet, they would be grandfathered in 4 spaces. And so unless their use required more, we wouldn't require more on-site parking or regulate that. So if it had a use that was 1 per 75 square feet, then we would have an issue. But otherwise, they could just kind of come and go.
Okay, but let's say this is a business that's actually on the plaza. For example, a current space that gets a change of use that would trigger a use permit review.
So we've been, with part of this, these edits would be, the primary challenge was with restaurants, because the parking was 1 space per 4 seats. And so by changing that to 1 per 300, that's the same amount that they're credited based on the existing language. So if it's facing the plaza, they're currently given a bank essentially for all of the 1,000 parking spaces we have downtown. And so I guess the question is, do we want to expand that from businesses that just front the plaza, do we want to make that a little bit bigger? We could make it just Broadway or just the first block of Broadway. We could leave it as it is and revisit it later with the parking management plan.
And I was going to say that, we've already decided to defer a discussion about the parking standards in the retail overlay zone in general. It seems to me that it probably doesn't do any harm to adopt the language we've got in here tonight, but I do think it should be part of that overall review that we undertake of the plaza overlay zone. Is there concurrence on that?
Yeah,
Yes, Sheila.
I have a question about it, too.
Okay. after.
Yeah.
What would be the harm in removing the words unreinforced masonry?
So that relates, the unreinforced masonry, and I'll defer to the chair and Commissioner Willers. There's history behind there. There was a list of buildings that needed to be reinforced, and I believe this was like an incentive for those buildings to be rehabilitated. I agree with the chair. I believe there's only one more, but I haven't done enough research to be comfortable deleting that altogether.
Okay, because it seems to me like it should just be structures, but if I'm missing something.
Well, I think what we need to do is confirm whether we have any more buildings in that unreinforced masonry category.
Yeah, so there, if you look, it's kind of in the middle, it says in compliance with Government Code 8875. So there, this would be for unreinforced masonry structures that don't face the plaza. So it's the buildings that face the plaza and the unreinforced masonry. So I can do some research on that and figure out if that's something we need to modify. Can I clarify, was the desire of the commission to keep it just structures adjoining the plaza or to expand it to the retail overlay zone?
Well, let's see what Mr. Barbos has to say, and then we'll bring up that issue. Thank you.
Well, since I'm talking, I'm in favor of expanding it to the Plaza Retail Overlay District, which is what I think we talked about at the last meeting. My question, part of it is just a word thing. The language that says it shall be assigned parking at the rate of 1 space per 300 feet. Do we mean credited instead of assigned?
Yep.
Okay. And then the other thing is how, just to be clear that so if there is a new use, that now I'm dropping down to the next line, additional parking will not be required unless the new use results in one of the following: increase in square footage of the structure. And I assume that if there is an increase in square footage, there would only be additional parking required at the rate of 300 feet per, 1 space per 300 feet, but it doesn't say that.
I was assuming it would be based on the use, whatever that additional space was for the use.
Okay.
And so just to take a step back, so this is for existing structures in the Plaza Retail Overlay Zone. And so, like you mentioned, if it's an existing structure, we're gonna credit it 1 space per 300 square feet. If they wanna do a 10,000 square foot addition, we're not gonna give them a credit for that new building area. And then we'll need to figure out where they're gonna put that, either on-site or off-site, or through the traffic demand management program, or other things that we develop down the line.
Okay, do we need any language in here just saying that the amount of parking required as a result of any increase will be determined by the underlying requirements for the use, or
So
something like
It
that?
says additional parking shall not be required for a new use unless the new use results in one of the following: an increase in the square footage of the structure, or 2, off-street parking requirement that exceeds 1 parking space for each 300 square feet of floor area. Additional off-street parking shall only be required for the expansion in building area or as associated with the increased parking ratios as applicable. And that's the existing language.
You feel that's sufficient to
Not necessarily.
address how we're going to determine the number of parking spaces required for this increase in square footage?
I am open
still
to
puzzled about
suggestions.
that.
Yeah, no, this section has always been somewhat of a head scratcher, so.
Okay.
It seemed, it seems clear to me. It's, you know, there's a parking demand of one parking space for every 300 square feet of an addition or an enlarged use. In other words, I have a use that requires 1 to 300, I get credit for that. I have now a use that requires 1 to 250. I'm accumulating parking spaces at a rate of 50 square foot increments because I've lowered my parking ratio. And so to me it's clear that if I have an addition or I increase the intensity of use of the land from 1 to 300 to 1 to 75 or 1 to 250, then I'm going to have to come up with additional parking spaces one way or another, either find them or pay for them. That's the way I see it.
Well, I get that, but I don't get where we tell people how we're going to determine how many parking spaces are going to be required for the new use.
It's already determined under the table, under table 4.4.
Okay, so we
You could say as, you know, as outlined in table 4.4. You know,
Okay.
because that's what, you know, this
yeah,
is
all
the
right.
description.
I get it. I'd like a little more clarity, but if the rest of you are fine with this, maybe I'm just laboring under my,
I like the clarification of as outlined in table 4.4.
I agree. Sheila?
Is, under F, is line 2 no longer necessary? Because I don't think we have any parking that exceeds 300 square feet per one parking space.
Yeah, I
So
was
we don't have
wondering that.
anything more stringent than that I know of. So would that just be,
So if we get into like converting a commercial use to residences and we had a bunch of small residences, that could potentially trigger it.
that could happen. It's happening in some places.
But I believe all the ones that were 200, we've increased.
Okay, so item 2 then, an off-street parking requirement that exceeds one parking space for each 300 square feet of floor area, and that would be if it would become residential instead of commercial.
Yeah, I think for now, I would recommend leaving it and we can come back if it ends up that we need to change it a different way.
Okay, isn't it great having 7 editors?
I know, I love it.
Okay, have we covered that? I think so. Now, the only thing I have left that I've marked is in our table on page 6, restaurants, 1 space for each 300 square feet of gross floor area. For outdoor seating, no off-street parking shall be required for up to 50% of the indoor gross floor area. My question is, does that mean off-street parking shall be required if the outdoor seating exceeds 50% of the indoor seating?
That's the way it reads now. And
Yes.
the city attorney requested a clarification there too, so I'm glad we're having this discussion. I mean, it could be no parking for outdoor seating.
Well, I think the reason I'm raising this is because, and I know that our pandemic dining on the plaza was a special circumstance and has lapsed and we no longer have that, but you know, it raised for me the interesting issue of an increased seating capacity for restaurants that in some cases may have equaled the indoor seating capacity of a restaurant, which brought into question the entirety of this issue of requiring parking at all based on seating, because clearly, and one could say perhaps the demand was lower for street parking because of the lower traveling people during the pandemic, but one way or another, what we saw was the doubling, in some cases, of the seating capacity of a restaurant with no seeming effect or implication for the parking at all. And so I do, however, think that we need to be clear that if we're having something in here tying to a percentage of the indoor, of anything pertaining to the indoor space, if we're creating any ratio at all, there needs to be some logic and rationality to it. And I don't really, as I say, the implication for me here was that if the outdoor seating exceeded 50% of the indoor gross space, then something would get triggered, because it's making the exception for being 50% or less. So if it's 51% or more, is there an effect? If there is no effect, then we needn't have that percentage exception at all. And if that's the case, all of the language in this should probably change. Mr. Willers, your hand is up.
There's two things with this that I would like actually to clarify. One is the gross, 300 square feet of the gross floor area. And the reason I want to clarify it is because I think both of these issues go back to the original requirement of 1 space to 4 seats. And so I would think that we would want 1 space for 300 square feet of what I would call serving area or table serving floor area, that kind of thing. And then that we would have, so that would give you the parking spaces that you need for your restaurant. And then I think that it should be related back to the number of seats again, to the outdoor seating. And that is that, no, I know, let me finish. And that is that we go back to that outdoor seating shall be restricted to 25% of the indoor serving area.
In square footage?
In square footage. Instead of leaving it open that, shall be, no off-street parking shall be required for 50%, we just limit the outdoor seating to a proportion of the indoor gross floor area. And that way, doesn't rely on table count, chair count, doesn't rely on anything other than the gross square footage of the serving area indoors that the parking spaces are required on. It's similar to what was in the ordinance prior, because you were limited, your parking was at a ratio of 1 for every 4 seats, and the outdoor seating was limited to 25% of the indoor seats.
So I would raise a question on this. So we've had a couple applications where the indoor space was really limited. There were 4 seats inside and 20 outside. Or we have several restaurants where the outdoor space is much bigger than the indoor space.
Outdoor space in the public or outdoor space outside on private property?
Private property.
See, that's where we need, to me, when I look at the primary thing that I see as being a difficulty in the code is that the public area seating, the sharing of the sidewalk, the public space, that businesses that don't have outdoor seating area, right? So maybe the thing to do is take that gross floor area and include private outdoor space as part of that.
I believe that's the intention. So sidewalk seating has a new line below. So the recommendation is no on-site parking for sidewalk seating. And I've always struggled with this because I wasn't there at the time, but I'm assuming, the model pre-COVID was most people were sitting inside and the outdoor space was just to kind of flux with seasonality, whereas now and where we live, it's always my preference to sit outside
Sure.
almost all the time. And so we do run into issues in the, with projects where there's more outdoor spaces desired by an applicant than indoor space. But it's hard to calculate outdoor space because it can be such a huge area. And we ran into this with the wine tasting rooms too.
Let me make a comment and then I'll have you go, Mr. Barbos. Okay. I try to get practical in my consideration of these things, and so I reflect on the reality of the restaurants we have. So if I, for example, look at Oso, which has a seating area, a square footage of seating area. That includes a counter area where people sit, and it has table area. And then it has an area outside that's behind the building. And so they've got that kind of space to work with. One of the concerns I have about defining the area that we're referring to as, you called it a service area. I'm not sure what I would call it, because when you have counter seating that's adjacent to the actual food prep area, I don't know where the dividing line is between service and seating. So I'm not sure what term works best in those situations. Then you think of the other options we have, which say the El Dorado, which probably has almost as much seating outside in their terraced patio as they have inside. And I don't know if they're still letting people eat on the sidewalk. I think they have sidewalk tables. And this whole issue of sidewalk table dining, incidentally, I don't think has been, I'll use the word advisedly, properly clarified, in that in the past, when the subject came up about obstructing the sidewalks with dining tables, the objection of the Public Works and the building department and other members of city staff at the time, and I'm hearkening back to when I was on the city council, oh so very long ago, raised strident enough objections that it was never approved by the councils I sat on or any subsequent council until the pandemic arrived. The idea of in some way obstructing the sidewalk, potentially creating trip and safety issues because of tables and chairs and all those things, all seem to have dissolved into thin air when the pandemic came. And lo and behold, I don't think we did have any particular difficulties, and perhaps it was the case that proved that there was no problem with putting chairs and tables on a portion of the sidewalk. I don't know if we have at this point anything in the code that says tables and chairs allowed to be placed on the sidewalk shall occupy no more than X number of feet or square inches, dependent upon the total width of the sidewalk, because we have sidewalks of varying widths. We don't have a consistent sidewalk width around the plaza. So I don't know if there's a formula that gets applied. I don't know if there's a standard that needs to be created to talk about sidewalk dining.
So if I could direct your attention, so Chapter 1206, sidewalk seating permits, it outlines the requirements for sidewalk seating. It is a license
Yes.
that has to be renewed annually. They have to have insurance, and it does have standards for width and,
Great.
and so we have it, so here in Chapter 12 is
What
where.
page is that on?
This is 1206, so this is at a different title. This is in streets and sidewalks. And then we have special use standards as well in Title 19.
Okay.
I don't want to jump too fast. So, so this is where sidewalk seating is defined, and it outlines the administration, the community, and this is where we have we're going back to our community development director, so it's really nice. I don't have to change this part of the code to reflect this. So they have 14 days. They have to post on site.
And are we really enforcing and monitoring all of this, or is it just,
No,
or it's just, you said no?
no, I don't believe we are. But we are working on that right now with our new OpenGov software and trying to create a system so it's like our business licenses that get updated kind of automatically.
Okay.
But so the sidewalk seating is really its own specific issue. The special use standards are in 1950. 060. Under C, outdoor dining and C, and this is where it's a little confusing as to whether sidewalk seating versus just outdoor. So this says outdoor dining and seating areas shall be allowed in conjunction with legally established restaurants and other food service uses in compliance with the following standards. The number of seats in the outdoor dining and seating area shall not exceed 25% of the amount of approved indoor seats. Otherwise, a conditional use permit is required.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Do we actually specify the number of approved indoor seats in restaurants?
We used to.
We don't anymore.
We typically do.
We do, so we
do
say.
typically, yeah.
Because I know occupancy can be limited from the standpoint of fire codes. Is that the number we're using?
No, it has been based on our parking code. So if a restaurant proposed to have 24 seats, that's what it said in the use permit. And so anytime that changed, it would have to come back to the planning commission for a use permit amendment.
Right, so we're back to this conundrum that
Counting
we've
seats.
been discussing of the connection between parking and seating. Oh, this is a tangled web we weave, isn't it?
But I think we're making it better. I think by changing it to a square footage standard, we're making it better, because that's number of square feet that the parking demand is going to be based on is not going to change dramatically in a reuse of that space as a restaurant again, because the basic layout, the tenant improvement of that restaurant isn't going to dramatically change.
Okay, it does mean adding a requirement to the application process of the calculation of the seating area of a restaurant.
So then I think I would recommend sticking with the gross floor area for the reason that we have an existing definition and all of the other parts of the code are relying on that definition. And then if we feel we need to change, we're already relaxing the
Does
standard.
gross floor area include the kitchen?
Let's read the definition.
I have a question or a comment when you get back to me.
And so if we wanted to change to service area, we would need a definition for that. I do support Commissioner Willer's comment about still counting seats for outside, because it's very specific where, like, when we're looking at the Walt use permit, you know, what is the outdoor area? It's harder to define that.
Mary, for your
And while
benefit.
you're searching for that, I'm going to make my last comment, and that is,
Go ahead.
I think that that it should be clarified in this language that sidewalk seating is not the outdoor seating that's being controlled in this. Sidewalk seating is being, exclusive of sidewalk seating.
I agree.
Maybe we don't have a definition for gross floor area.
Okay.
Thought
And
we-
I was going to say to Mary, you can see that the job of the planning commission is working with words. What they mean, how they apply. I mean, that is the essence of what we do here, is what do words mean? What's the impact? What are the implications?
So-
How do we define them? It's almost the whole task we have, because having done that, we then decide when we evaluate an application as to whether it conforms with what we've intended to have happen based on the words we're using.
So gross floor area is typically, it's a building-wide standard. It is from outside wall to outside wall. It is the area of a building. And that's why, to me, that as a parking load in relationship to a restaurant is kind of odd. Because it will include storage, it will include the kitchen, it will include blah, 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 the counter itself.
So I think
But
so.
maybe,
How about if we just increased it from 300 to 500 for restaurants? No, seriously, because
I understand.
that way we're giving them, 300 square feet, but if we add on the fact that they probably have with restaurants, restrooms, storage area, we could just take that number out.
That might-
500.
If we come up with a
Finally get a comment in
definition.
here?
Of course, Mr. Barbos.
Thank you.
We don't want to hurt your feelings. Go ahead.
Well, you already have hurt my feelings, but, no. Well, here's an observation. When it's nice weather, nobody wants to eat inside. So what is the point in adding on additional parking for outdoor seating when there's no one in the restaurant? They're all outside. Go to Hot Monk. Nobody wants to eat inside. We're all outside. So why are we basing this on the indoor when it's not reflective of the parking load during good weather? People don't want to be indoors. They want to be outdoors. So I don't know how that translates, but I think that the 50% rule doesn't take that into effect. And I'm also in favor of maybe just increasing it to 500 feet takes care of retreating from the gross floor area as a determining factor. But nonetheless, I think we need to just, if we learned anything from the pandemic, is that we've been over-regulating parking. Let's not keep doing it.
What about if we say no parking for outdoor seating?
I would be fine with that.
Exclusive of sidewalk seating,
Correct.
because that's limited to something else.
Yep.
Well, and from a practical standpoint, that's what we did for 2 years during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we've already experimented with it, and as I say, maybe the traffic and auto load was lower because of decrease in tourism, but it's hard to say. It might be interesting actually to go back, and I don't know if the city can tabulate this kind of information, but to see what the percentage or the degree of drop-off in this particular sector is. I don't know if we can track restaurant revenue as a metric to compare the pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic load. It would be interesting if we could have that kind of data, but perhaps we can't get it.
I'm making a mental note, we need to change 1950-060 as well.
Okay? Yes, Sheila?
I just want to echo Commissioner Barbose's comment that I feel like we do overregulate parking to the detriment of businesses that could come in and flourish in this area. And I can think of several examples that were fought over just parking issues, like Oxbow Market, like the opportunities that we've let slip by because we were so focused on parking. So I just want to echo those comments and say that I would like us to get out of the parking business.
Yeah, we, as staff, we have applicants coming in all the time wanting to open restaurants, but if there's no on-site park, if it's on Broadway, they can't.
I do want to voice, however, taking into consideration both our experience and what Sheila and Steve have mentioned, that the plaza uses is not restricted simply to restaurants. We have many other merchants and retailers, some of whom feel quite like second-class citizens at this moment, who have not gotten the benefit of anything that happened during the pandemic. There is no equal generosity on the part of the city in terms of easing standards for them. They still have customers who want to be able to park and come to their store. And as much as I appreciate the unique role of restaurants around the plaza and their patrons, the fact is that I think we have to also explore at the same time being more even-handed in this and not coming up with a two-tier system of plaza businesses. One that has no parking requirements on it and all the others do. And I would feel that we have to exercise caution in that way. Why not you? If not you, who?
What are we on to next? We did restaurants, moving up. Are there any other?
Have we come to a conclusion about that? Did we want to increase it to 500? Did we want to?
So I just kind of teeing off your point about the equality. The retail is 300, and so keeping restaurants at 300 would have them have the same parking standard.
Yeah.
But I think I'm still going to push. I would like to see us raise the numbers and not have the parking be such a burden. So I would still push for restaurants to be at least 500 square, one parking space per 500 square.
Sure. Question, the use of a restaurant and the use of a retail store, the time frame, they don't jive. So how does that come into play? And another question, you mentioned that it's the parking code that determines the amount of seats in a restaurant. Where does the fire code come in, and which one supersedes the other?
So the fire code is going to trump everything, and we collaborate during the development process. So when a restaurant application comes in, it gets transmitted to the fire department. Planning staff doesn't look at the fire code. We just rely on the fire marshal to establish those regulations. But my understanding is that the fire code is typically higher than what our restrictions are for parking.
I would expect so. Thank you.
Well, as I say, I understand the emphasis that we're placing on restaurants. What I'm concerned about is that there's an implicate order that we're creating here by changing a different standard for the restaurants than the other retailers. The implicate order is that the retail spaces on the plaza become more valuable for restaurants than anything else because it's less onerous and the restrictions are looser. Now,
Let's make retail one per 500 square foot.
well, let me just finish my thought. My concern is that we not unintentionally create an environment which has an impact on the use of the plaza real estate in this way. And if we diminish the value of a use on the plaza by improving or enhancing the flexibility for another use, we're playing favorites. And I just want to point that out. I think it's a dangerous precedent to play favorites. So if we want to increase the number of square foot per space at this point to 500 for everybody, I'd feel better about that than I would by saying this class of business can have a looser requirement than another.
I think my recommendation would be to keep it at 300, get through the parking management plan and reevaluate and see where it stands. We're already making a pretty substantial change going from
Well,
the
and
1 to 4.
that's another way to do it. I mean, I think we all can concede that, this is basically a first step to get some things in place, including the loading standards and the other things that are part of this that we need to have in place. And we can't afford to just let it go on forever, because we've got applications in the queue and with an eye towards a modification of this in the future. So Christina's suggestion is I think appropriate, which is we could leave it as it is for now and explore it further when we have more information. Amy?
Yes, I just have a question because I think there's been a lot of conversation. So what I heard is that we're adding some language about the exempting sidewalk seating. But where are we in the discussion? Because what I heard last was that we're talking about 300 square feet and excluding all outdoor. Is that what?
I'm hopeful
Is that on the
that
table?
that's what we're doing.
Okay.
What the notes that I have is, so sidewalk seating, no on-site parking
Right.
required.
Right.
For restaurants, 1 space per each 300 square feet of gross floor area, and no off-site parking for outdoor seating.
Right, okay, so question, and this might be something you discussed at the last meeting, but what is the justification in general for not capturing outside in the actual private restaurant area? What is the justification? I'm just trying to understand that piece, because I don't think I'm clear on that. So we talk about indoor in the private space, but we're not talking about, we're trying to exclude outdoor in that private space, which gets to your comment, Mr. Chairman, that we are providing special exception, but what's the justification for excluding outside to begin with? I'm not clear on that.
My justification for proposing that is that they're not used. I mean, the indoor space is not going to be used if the outdoor space is more popular. So why double charge people for
Got it.
parking that's not being used? So if it's 300 feet indoors, they can have outdoor seating. They're not using their indoor seating during,
Okay.
that was my justification. But just one other comment about retail on the plaza, because this has been a subject for years, and ask most people who own retail businesses on the plaza tell you that the rents are so ridiculous, has nothing to do with the parking. The lack of viability for retail on the plaza has to do with the rents. It's only successful restaurants and real estate offices and wine tasting facilities that are actually functional. You see them coming and going. But those have the potential for generating the revenue that can justify these rents. But I'm curious what you would say, Therese, because you're in the biz. But isn't that the real reason why it's so difficult for retail people, not parking?
You make a good point.
Well, that's true. And so here we're talking about the two forces, however. You've got what we would refer to as the market forces, which are the private property owners who can regulate the price that they wish to rent their own properties for, that is outside the city's jurisdiction. We don't regulate it. We don't tell them what the price per footage needs to be. They can charge whatever they think the market will bear. That is what used to be referred to as the hand of the free market, right? In some cases is referred to as the providence of the free market, if you want to put it in sacred terms, as we have sometimes in America. Then you've got the government role. And so the question that's being raised here is, yes, the hand of the free market definitely influences the real estate environment on the plaza. Should government's role be to, as well, influence that environment? Should government regulation be attuned to favoring or disfavoring one business or another, keeping in mind that the marketplace, the free market, is already doing that? Now, is it government's role to come in and say, this is what we like and what we want and what we don't like and what we don't want? To a certain extent, we do that already. We've said you can only have so many tasting rooms on the plaza. We've said you can't put a cannabis dispensary on the plaza. We make all kinds of decisions about these things kind of in a sideways fashion, but I wouldn't say that the city of Sonoma, or city or government in general, has basically said, we are going to decide what shall be in our commercial district and what shall not. And we're not tipping the scale in either particular case. Now, it's an argument as to whether or not government should or should not do that. The market's doing it. What I'm saying is I'm not all that comfortable with the idea of government deciding to do that as well. Mr. Willers.
I'd like to support Christina's comment that we leave it at 300 because, one, most of these spaces are around the plaza, and we've just adjusted the parking load of the plaza to 1 to 300 in terms of exclusion of parking. Two, a four-top, kind of a standard four-top, is a little over 100 square feet of space that it needs in floor area. So we've already multiplied that by that's only a third of what we're now allowing. So we've already reduced the parking load by 2/3, essentially, by doing that, by expanding it to 300 square feet. And that is also the retail number as well. So there's some equality because the retail number is gross square feet as well. So we just, we've lightened the load on restaurants because we're not counting seats anymore, and we're allowing them to use, from what I hear, we're allowing them to use their outdoor seating free of charge, essentially. And they still have to comply with the sidewalk standards, put seating in the public space, and I think it's win-win all the way around that way. So.
And if I could just add, we're going to hopefully be addressing a lot of the concerns of the retail business through the parking management plan. A lot of the comments that we got are the need for short-term pickup and drop-off if somebody buys a big pot or cast iron pan, or someone wanting to come to pick up an order that they've placed ahead of time. And so we'll be addressing that through the parking management plan.
Yes, and one of the other things when we get into the topic, or the council gets into the topic as well, is if we decide to create a paid parking and a forced paid parking process in the plaza, it also raises the opportunity for retailers and other merchants on the plaza to validate parking in some fashion so that people can come in and not have to pay depending on how long they're going to be there and things like that. So, ironically enough, if we move to the pay parking model through this study in the future, as much as people have kind of a gut reaction to it, it may in fact facilitate the a fairer use and enjoyment of the plaza for people, because the merchants can participate in the rewards of that plaza turnover, which they can't now as easily, because you never know when somebody who's parking in front of your business is walking down the street to go someplace else as opposed to coming into your business. If you have to do the validation, you begin to develop a metric as to how many people are actually coming to your business that are parking and looking for parking. So, anyway, yes, Sheila.
Following up on Commissioner Barbose's question about the indoor-outdoor space, some areas, it's seasonal, right? People are going to be outside, but then you have the tents. And you look at Hot Monk, and they have that permanent tent all year long, which basically says it's no longer seasonal. They have this giant outdoor space as well as their indoor space. That kind of puts another little layer on there that I'm not really sure how we will deal with, but I just want to raise it as it's probably the tent issue more than the parking issue. But it's just something that I just want to make sure that we're conscious of.
All right, well, let's see if we can get some a sense of closure on this. The proposal's been put forward that that we just stick with the 300 square foot standard for now, and it gets revisited when the further studies are completed. So is there anyone who objects to that? No. Okay, so I think that's been settled. That was all I had marked as needing some further discussion, but are there other members of the commission who would like to focus on anything we haven't talked about yet? Sheila?
Sorry to talk so much. It's really minor, but the copy and reproduction center, one space for each 400 square feet of gross floor area. I'm just like thinking of Pat's Copy World, and that just seems to be quite a high burden when what is our light manufacturing is 1,000 square feet. And so I would just like to see that number increased as well.
Can you, copy and reproduction centers, so one per 400?
Don't even try.
Yeah, they have 2 parking spaces and they probably have 2,000 square feet or something there. I don't even know what they've got, but I just feel like it's minor, I know.
What was your recommendation?
To match the general manufacturing, which is 1,000 square feet.
It's worth noting that this is for new applications.
Right.
Yes. I don't want to freak
You
Pat's out.
don't know what's going to happen in the future. That might be a really big business on Broadway.
Is there, I've heard one comment about changing copy and reproduction centers from 400 to 1,000. Are there other comments on that issue? Consensus?
I'm okay. I'm okay with it. Anybody object? No, we're okay. All right. Do we have any members of the public who want to say something? Usually I have Matthew here to remind me.
We just have Grandma watching.
Grandma, okay. You want to wave to Grandma? Okay. Perfect. All right, well, do we need to have a motion and
We need to open for public comment.
that's what I thought I just did, but that's okay.
All right.
Do we have any public comment? There's nobody online, right? Grandma has nothing to say? All right, opening public comment, closing public comment. All right, now we need a motion and a second to approve this and forward it on to the city council, am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, who would like to make a motion?
Please.
Mr. Willis.
Finally, after 15 years. I'd like to make a motion to approve or to recommend to the city council the adoption of the revised parking standards as amended by the commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sheila. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
All right. Commissioner O'Gorman Jenkins. Yes. Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent.
Aye.
Commissioner Willers.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbos.
Yes.
And Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right. Thank you very much. That was fun. I really enjoy this commission. Well, don't tell my wife that, you know. Okay, no, she's not watching unless she wants to use the name Grandma. Do we have any items for discussion? Apparently not. I will say
How about
that
an update on the planning director?
planning director is going to start on the 22nd. The planning director is Jennifer Gates. Would you like to tell us more about Jennifer, David?
I think you're doing a great job. Yes, Jennifer Gates will be joining us next Thursday. It'll be her first day. She brings a wealth of experience both on the planning side. She has a historic preservation master's degree as well. She's went through 3 rounds of interviews. I think she did a great job. Yeah, I'm excited to have her here. And she will be sitting here. This is the last you'll see of me in this chair, so you'll have somebody that actually will work with you moving forward and work with the staff. And she, again, just as a reminder, she will be overseeing the planning section and the building section. So that's the change that we're making. And then in addition, what we'll do in the budget that I'm taking forward next Wednesday is creating a building official position. So a building official will report to her. And then that way, when Wayne, who is the current building official, leaves, we have that position in place. So all planning and building items will funnel up to Jennifer so that she can coordinate to make sure that those 2 elements are working together to support what we're trying to achieve.
And will we have more people in building reviewing plans?
Right now, we with the building official, that will help. That will actually add a position. Right now, Wayne, as the building official and as director, is spending probably 90% of his time on administrative stuff that we need to do, like getting the software up and running, the online permitting. So we're actually short plan check on the building side. So this will help that considerably.
And officially, will we refer to Jennifer as the development director? What is her actual title?
Community Development Director.
Community Development Director, okay. So planning director has been shelved as a title.
That's correct, and so is the building director, or whatever.
Okay. Thank you.
Lots of code amendments to do.
Yeah.
Any comments from the commission? Mr. Willers?
I actually have a question, and it relates to a fence that's on 5th Street East with the new development of the 2 new homes with their ADUs.
It's a code enforcement issue.
Has it been brought, is it being enforced?
It's in progress.
Okay.
Which properties are those?
5th Street and Fana?
5th Street West.
Liz Swain,
West,
yeah.
you said east.
I'm sorry, 5th
You
Street
meant- okay.
West, yeah.
I know what you're talking about, yep.
All right. Other comments? No? Then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
All right. We are adjourned.
Christina, congrats on your certification. That's great. Well, that's a very, very nice feather in the cap. Oh my God. Oh, yeah. I know. We should get the girls together. I know. I know. I was talking to Rachel Pearson about trying to get well, you know, there's a good group from presentation come over, and there's a bunch. I guess you guys split 8 and 8. I'm sad to hear that her first choice was I rolled. I know. But I think Mary's found moving from Crestwood even to Adele. Just bringing the flowery kids, there's inevitably new people.
I think she's going to be fine no matter where she is, and the bring kids and the logistics being here and her being right down the street.
They mostly are welcome. Girls are, girls are girls. But generally, the groups that she's friends with, they don't have like.
I'm gonna be selling uniforms. That's good.
I know. That's good for the laundry, right? We're gonna take some pictures of parking around town. Yes. And we're gonna come up with some feedback. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
to?
When I first started, our meetings almost always went till like midnight, 12:30.
Well, it was funny, I asked